Sarah Martinez's alarm shrieked at 5:30 a.m., the same relentless sound that had greeted her every morning for the past 3 years. She rolled out of bed, her body protesting after another 12-hour shift at Riverside General Hospital. The coffee maker gurgled to life as she padded to Emma's room, where her 8-year-old daughter slept peacefully, clutching the worn teddy bear that had been her constant companion since infancy. "Morning, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, gently shaking Emma's shoulder. "Big day today, remember? Your presentation." Emma's eyes fluttered open, instantly bright with excitement. "Bring your parent to work day," she exclaimed, bouncing up in bed. For weeks, Emma had been preparing her project about Sarah's nursing career, carefully crafting poster boards decorated with drawings of stethoscopes and hearts, interviewing her mother about saving lives and helping patients heal. As they ate breakfast together, cereal for Emma, black coffee for Sarah, Emma chattered nervously about her presentation. "Do you think the other kids will like it, Mama? I drew you in your scrubs helping that little boy who broke his arm." Sarah's heart swelled with pride and ached with exhaustion simultaneously. While other parents in Emma's class owned businesses or worked in gleaming office buildings, Sarah spent her days cleaning wounds, comforting dying patients, and working overtime to pay their modest rent. But Emma saw only heroism in her mother's work, and that made every sacrifice worthwhile. "They're going to love it, baby. You've worked so hard and I'm so proud of you." The morning routine continued with practiced efficiency, Emma's uniform pressed and perfect despite being second-hand, lunch packed with careful attention to nutrition if not variety. Backpack checked twice for the presentation materials. Sarah kissed her daughter goodbye at the school entrance, promising to be there by 2 p.m. for the presentation. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah arrived at Maplewood Elementary, still wearing her hospital scrubs and carrying the exhaustion of a morning spent in the ICU. She slipped into the back of Mrs. Henderson's third-grade classroom, where proud parents filled folding chairs, many having left important meetings or rearranged their schedules to attend. Emma was third to present. She stood at the front of the classroom, small but determined, her voice clear as she began. "My mom is a nurse at Riverside General Hospital. She saves people's lives every day and works really hard to take care of me and her patients." Sarah watched with tears in her eyes as her brilliant daughter explained the importance of healthcare workers, showing her carefully crafted posters and sharing stories Sarah had told her about helping families through their darkest moments. The presentation was thoughtful, well-researched, and delivered with the poise of someone twice Emma's age. Then Madison Walsh raised her hand. Madison, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer uniform, was the undisputed queen of the third grade. Her mother, Victoria Walsh, sat in the front row wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Sarah's monthly salary, her expression one of barely concealed boredom. "My mom says nurses are just servants," Madison announced loudly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent classroom. "And Emma doesn't even have a dad. She's just a loser with no dad. And her mom is just a servant who cleans up gross stuff." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Several other children giggled, emboldened by Madison's cruelty. "Yeah, where's your dad, Emma?" called out another child. "My dad says single moms are just trouble." Emma's face crumpled. The confident little girl who had been sharing her mother's heroism moments before now stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked desperately toward her mother, seeking rescue from this sudden nightmare. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat uncomfortably. "That's enough, children. Emma, why don't you take your seat?" No reprimand for Madison, no acknowledgement of the cruelty, just a suggestion that Emma disappear. Sarah wanted to storm to the front of the room, to defend her daughter and demand justice, but she knew it would only make things worse for Emma. Instead, she watched helplessly as her baby girl gathered her presentation materials with shaking hands and returned to her desk, her shoulders hunched with shame. The remaining presentations passed in a blur. Sarah barely heard the other children talking about their parents' careers as lawyers, executives, and entrepreneurs. All she could see was Emma's devastated face. All she could hear was Madison's cruel laughter echoing in her mind. The drive home was quiet, except for Emma's occasional sniffles. Finally, as they pulled into their apartment complex, Emma spoke in a small voice that broke Sarah's heart. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids? Am I really a loser?" Sarah pulled over and turned to face her daughter, fighting back her own tears. "Baby, listen to me. You are not a loser. You are brilliant and kind and brave, and I love you more than anything in this world. But Madison's right, isn't she? I don't have a dad, and you do clean up gross stuff at work. Emma, your father," Sarah's voice caught. She had always planned to tell Emma the truth when she was older, when she could understand the complexity of their situation. "Your father was a hero, sweetheart. He died serving our country before you were born. And my job isn't gross, it's important. I help people heal. I save lives." That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table and wept. She cried for her daughter's broken heart, for the injustice of 8-year-olds being taught to value people by their bank accounts, and for her own powerlessness against a system that seemed designed to crush families like theirs. But beneath the tears, something else was growing. A fierce, protective anger that would not be contained. Madison Walsh and her mother had picked the wrong family to humiliate. They had no idea what Sarah Martinez was capable of when someone threatened her child. Tomorrow she would begin to show them. The next morning, Sarah called in sick for the first time in 2 years. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving Emma alone with her pain, and she had business to attend to at Maplewood Elementary. After dropping Emma off with her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, Sarah drove to the school with a carefully rehearsed speech about dignity, respect, and the responsibility of educators to protect all children. Principal Robert Henderson's office was exactly what Sarah expected. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, and diplomas from expensive universities covering the walls. Henderson himself was a thin man in his 50s, with the soft look of someone who had never faced real hardship. He listened to Sarah's account of yesterday's incident with the detached expression of someone hearing about a minor inconvenience. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand you're upset," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But children can be cruel. It's part of growing up. Emma needs to learn to toughen up if she's going to succeed in this world." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. She's 8 years old. She was humiliated in front of her entire class while adults did nothing to stop it. Children from broken homes often struggle with these challenges. Henderson continued, apparently oblivious to the offense in his words. Perhaps Emma would benefit from counseling to help her cope with her situation. Her situation? Sarah's voice remained steady, but ice crept into her tone. "You mean being raised by a single mother who works 60 hours a week to provide for her?" Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Mrs. Martinez, I understand this is difficult, but Madison Walsh comes from a very prominent family. Her mother is the school board president, and the Walsh family has donated significantly to our programs. We can't go around disciplining children for playground disputes." There it was. The ugly truth laid bare. Emma's pain didn't matter because Madison's parents had money and influence. Sarah stood slowly, her nursing scrubs suddenly feeling like armor rather than a uniform of service. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for clarifying the school's position." As Sarah left the office, she heard Henderson's secretary whispering into her phone, "Yes, Mrs. Walsh, she just left. I think you should know what she said about Madison." The betrayal cut deeper when Sarah stopped by the school library to pick up Emma's forgotten homework. She overheard 2 teachers discussing the incident in hushed tones. "Poor little Emma," said Mrs. Chen, the librarian. But honestly, what did her mother expect? "Victoria Walsh has been asking questions about the Martinez family for months." "What kind of questions?" asked the other teacher. "Oh, you know, whether Sarah Martinez is a suitable influence on the other children, whether Emma's background might be disruptive to the classroom environment. Victoria's been quite vocal about maintaining standards at Maplewood." Sarah pressed herself against the bookshelf, invisible in her shock. Victoria Walsh hadn't just allowed yesterday's cruelty, she had orchestrated a campaign against Emma before her daughter ever opened her mouth. "I heard Victoria's been telling other parents that Sarah's an unwed mother," the librarian continued. "Some parents have actually requested that their children not be paired with Emma for group projects." The conversation faded as the teachers moved away, but the damage was done. Sarah understood now that yesterday's incident wasn't isolated cruelty, it was the culmination of months of systematic exclusion. While she had been working double shifts to provide for Emma, Victoria Walsh had been poisoning the well, ensuring that Emma would be seen as lesser, as other, as unworthy of belonging. Sarah drove home in a daze, the full scope of the betrayal washing over her. It wasn't just about playground teasing or childhood cruelty, it was about power, about a system designed to protect the privileged while crushing anyone who dared to reach for something better. That evening, after Emma went to bed, Sarah sat at her laptop researching the Walsh family. Victoria Walsh wasn't just the school board president, she was married to a city councilman, sat on the boards of 3 local charities, and had been featured in the society pages for her work with disadvantaged youth. The irony was bitter. Here was a woman who publicly championed helping underprivileged children, while privately working to destroy one. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the hospital. "Heard you called in sick. Everything okay? You never miss work." For a moment Sarah considered confiding in her colleague, but what would she say? That she was being destroyed by a group of wealthy parents who saw her daughter as a threat to their children's superiority. That years of sacrifice and hard work meant nothing against the casual cruelty of those born to privilege. Instead she typed back, "Family emergency. I'll be in tomorrow." But as she stared at her reflection in the dark window, Sarah realized that the woman who would return to work tomorrow would be different. The trusting, optimistic single mother who had believed that hard work and good intentions were enough was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the system was designed to crush people like her and Emma. Victoria Walsh had made a critical error in her calculations. She had assumed that Sarah Martinez was just another struggling single mother who would accept her daughter's humiliation in silence. She had no idea that Sarah was capable of fighting back, or that Emma's father had left them with more than just painful memories. Tomorrow Sarah would begin to discover just how much power she actually had. And Victoria Walsh would learn that some battles should never be started. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the file cabinet in her bedroom closet, the one she hadn't touched in 8 years. Beneath old tax returns and Emma's birth certificate lay the manila envelope she'd been avoiding since the day Emma was born. Inside were the only remnants of Michael Chen, a few letters, 2 photographs, and the official notification of his death in Afghanistan. She had met Michael during his leave before deployment. 3 months of intense, beautiful connection before he shipped out, promising to return and build a life together. Instead, she received a phone call from his commanding officer and a form letter expressing the military's condolences for her loss. At 19, pregnant and grieving, Sarah had been too overwhelmed to ask questions about the circumstances of his death. Now, staring at the faded documents, she realized she had never truly known the man who fathered her child. The next morning Sarah approached Dr. Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Victoria, who worked in the hospital's emergency department and had served as an army medic in Iraq. Jennifer was reviewing charts when Sarah found her in the break room. "Jen, I need a favor," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from her colleague. "My daughter's father died in Afghanistan, and I need to find out more about his service record. I was young and stupid when it happened. I never followed up on the details." Jennifer looked up from her tablet, her expression serious. "What's his name and unit?" "Michael Chen, 75th Ranger Regiment." Sarah slid the notification letter across the table. "He died in 2016. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. "Rangers, that's elite. What do you know about how he died?" "Just that it was combat related." The notification was pretty standard. Jennifer said carefully, "If he was a ranger and died in 2016, there might be more to this story. That was a heavy year for special operations. Let me make some calls." 3 days later Jennifer pulled Sarah aside during their shift. "You need to sit down for this," she said, her voice unusually grave. "I spoke with a contact at the Pentagon. Michael Chen wasn't just a ranger, he was part of a classified operation in Afghanistan." Sarah's heart began to race. "What kind of operation?" In September 2016, his unit received intelligence about a planned attack on a school in Kandahar province. Taliban insurgents had planted explosives and were planning to detonate them during school hours. Over 200 children would have died. Jennifer paused, checking to make sure they weren't overheard. "Michael's team was sent to neutralize the threat." "What happened?" "They successfully disarmed most of the explosives, but the Taliban launched a counterattack while the children were still in the building. Michael stayed behind to ensure the last group of kids could evacuate safely. He held off the attackers single-handedly until the building was clear." "But," Jennifer's voice caught, "he didn't make it out." Sarah stared at her friend, the words not quite processing. He saved children. Sarah, your daughter's father received a posthumous Medal of Honor. He saved 247 children and 18 teachers that day. The ceremony was classified because of the ongoing operation, but the citation should be in the public record now. That evening, Sarah sat at her computer with Jennifer's help, accessing military databases and news archives. Slowly, the story of Michael Chen emerged, not just a soldier, but a hero whose sacrifice had saved an entire school. Photos showed him receiving commendations, testimonials from fellow soldiers described his courage and leadership, and most importantly, there were detailed accounts of his final mission. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen had been recommended for the Medal of Honor by his commanding officer, Colonel James Morrison, who was now stationed at Fort Bragg. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as team leader during combat operations in Afghanistan." As Sarah read her daughter's father's story, a plan began to form. Emma's school was preparing for their annual Heroes in Our Community presentation in 2 weeks, a perfect opportunity to share Michael's true story. But Sarah wanted more than just a school presentation. She wanted the community to understand what kind of man had fathered the little girl Madison Walsh had called a loser with no dad. Sarah spent the next week making phone calls. First, she contacted the Medal of Honor Society, who connected her with Colonel Morrison. The colonel remembered Michael vividly and was moved to learn about Emma. Staff Sergeant Chen was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. Morrison told her over the phone, "I'd be honored to attend your daughter's presentation and tell people about her father's heroism." Next, Sarah reached out to 3 surviving members of Michael's unit, now civilians scattered across the country. Each agreed to provide written testimonials about Michael's character and his final mission. She contacted the local VFW, who offered to provide an honor guard for the presentation. But Sarah's masterstroke came when she called the school district's central office and spoke with Superintendent Rebecca Torres, explaining that Emma wanted to honor her father's memory at the upcoming Heroes presentation. Torres, unaware of the underlying drama, thought it was a wonderful opportunity for community engagement and agreed to attend personally, bringing a photographer from the district's communications office. Sarah also quietly reached out to Lisa Hernandez, a reporter from the local newspaper who had covered several military family stories. Lisa was immediately interested in the story of a local Medal of Honor recipient's daughter and the upcoming school presentation. Finally, Sarah contacted her congressman's office. When she explained that the daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient had been bullied at school for not having a father, the response was immediate. The congressman would send a representative to the presentation with a flag that had flown over the Capitol in Michael's honor. As Sarah organized these pieces, she carefully documented every instance of bullying Emma had endured, screenshotting the school's inadequate responses to her complaints. She researched the school board's anti-bullying policies and found multiple violations in how Emma's case had been handled. The night before the presentation, Sarah helped Emma practice reading the biography she had written about her father. Emma's eyes shone with pride as she learned about Michael's heroism. "Mama, Daddy really was a hero, wasn't he?" "Yes, sweetheart, he was, and tomorrow everyone is going to know it." Sarah tucked Emma into bed, then spent the night finalizing her preparations. Tomorrow, Victoria Walsh and her daughter would learn that some families carry more honor than money could ever buy. They had called Emma a loser with no dad, never imagining that her father had died saving children just like them. The irony was perfect, and Sarah intended to make sure everyone understood it. The morning of the Heroes in Our Community presentation, Sarah arrived at Maplewood Elementary 30 minutes early. She watched from the parking lot as news vans from 2 local stations pulled up. Apparently word had spread about the Medal of Honor story. Her heart raced, but not with nerves. This was the moment she had been planning for 2 weeks. Emma clutched her presentation folder tightly as they walked toward the school. "Mama, there are so many people here. What if I forget what to say? Just remember what we practiced, sweetheart. Tell them about your daddy, and remember you have nothing to be ashamed of. Your father was a hero." The gymnasium was packed beyond capacity. Parents filled folding chairs while students sat cross-legged on the floor. Sarah spotted Victoria Walsh in the third row, looking irritated by the crowd, and checking her expensive watch. Madison sat nearby, whispering to her friends and occasionally glancing at Emma with undisguised contempt. Principal Henderson looked nervous as he surveyed the unexpected turnout. Superintendent Torres sat in the front row next to Lisa Hernandez, the newspaper reporter, who was already taking notes. A photographer from the district office moved quietly around the perimeter, capturing the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henderson began, his voice slightly strained, "welcome to our Heroes in Our Community presentation. Today our students will share stories about the heroes in their lives." The first few presentations were typical: a firefighter father, a teacher grandmother, a police officer uncle. The audience politely applauded each child's story. Sarah watched Victoria Walsh relax slightly, probably assuming this would be another routine school event. Then Emma's name was called. Emma walked to the front of the gymnasium with careful steps, her small figure dwarfed by the crowd. She placed her presentation materials on the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, finding her mother's encouraging smile. "My hero is my daddy, Staff Sergeant Michael Chen," Emma began, her voice clear and strong. "He died in Afghanistan before I was born, but I just learned that he was awarded the Medal of Honor for saving children." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah saw Victoria Walsh sit up straighter, her expression shifting from boredom to concern. Emma continued, reading from the biography Sarah had helped her prepare. "On September 15, 2016, my daddy and his team learned that bad men had put bombs in a school in Afghanistan. There were 247 children inside, just like us." The gymnasium had fallen completely silent. Even the youngest students seemed to understand the gravity of what Emma was sharing. "My daddy and his team went to save those children. They took apart most of the bombs, but then the bad men came to fight them. All the other soldiers had to leave to get help, but my daddy stayed behind to make sure every single child got out safely." Sarah watched Madison Walsh's face change as the story unfolded. The cruel confidence from 2 weeks ago was replaced by confusion and something that might have been shame. "My daddy held off the bad men by himself until every child and teacher was safe," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "He saved 247 children, but he died protecting them. The army gave him the Medal of Honor because he was so brave." Emma paused, looking directly at Madison Walsh. "Some kids at school said I was a loser because I don't have a daddy. But my daddy died saving children just like them. I think that makes him the biggest hero of all." The silence that followed was deafening. Then from the back of the gymnasium, someone began to clap. The applause built slowly, then erupted into a standing ovation that seemed to shake the building. But Emma wasn't finished. "I want to introduce some special guests who came to tell you about my daddy," she said, gesturing toward the gymnasium doors. The doors opened, and Colonel Morrison entered in full dress uniform, followed by an honor guard from the local VFW. The crowd rose to their feet again as the uniformed men marched to the front of the gymnasium. Colonel Morrison took the microphone from Emma with gentle hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to tell you about Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to command." For the next 10 minutes, Morrison described Michael's heroism in detail, his leadership, his sacrifice, and his ultimate choice to stay behind and ensure that every child in that Afghan school lived to go home to their families. "Staff Sergeant Chen knew he might not make it out," Morrison concluded. "But he also knew that 247 children were counting on him. He made his choice, and every one of those children is alive today because of his sacrifice." The colonel then presented Emma with her father's Medal of Honor, carefully placing the ribbon around her neck. "This belongs to you, Emma. Your father earned it protecting children, and I know he would be incredibly proud of the brave young woman you've become." The gymnasium erupted again, but Sarah's attention was focused on Victoria Walsh. The woman's face had gone pale, and she was staring at Emma with an expression of dawning horror. Sarah could practically see the realization hitting her. She had orchestrated months of cruelty against the daughter of a man who had died saving children. As the presentation concluded and people began to mingle, Sarah watched Victoria Walsh whispering urgently to her husband, who had arrived late and missed most of the presentation. Other parents approached Sarah with apologies and admiration, many admitting they had heard rumors but never knew the truth. But the most telling moment came when Sarah overheard Madison Walsh talking to her mother. "Mommy, Emma's daddy really was a hero, wasn't he? He saved all those kids." Victoria's response was sharp and desperate. "Madison, this whole thing is a publicity stunt. That woman orchestrated all of this to make us look bad. She's exploiting her daughter's tragedy for sympathy." Several nearby parents turned to stare at Victoria, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Lisa Hernandez, the reporter, was close enough to hear every word, and Sarah watched her scribble notes furiously. As people began to leave, Superintendent Torres approached Sarah. "Mrs. Martinez, I had no idea about your family's situation. I'd like to discuss how we can better support Emma and recognize her father's service." But before Sarah could respond, Victoria Walsh appeared at her elbow, her face flushed with anger. "This is completely inappropriate," Victoria announced loudly enough for nearby parents to hear. "You've turned a simple school presentation into a media circus. This kind of attention-seeking behavior is exactly what I've been concerned about." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah looked at this woman who had spent months trying to destroy her daughter, who even now couldn't admit she had been wrong. Attention-seeking, Sarah's voice was quiet but carried clearly. "My daughter was called a loser with no dad. I simply wanted people to know the truth about who her father was. You exploited a tragedy for sympathy." Victoria shot back. "And frankly, I question whether this kind of drama is appropriate for our school environment." The confrontation was far from over, but Sarah realized something had fundamentally shifted. The other parents were no longer looking at her with pity or dismissal, they were looking at Victoria Walsh with disgust. The balance of power had begun to tip, and tomorrow's school board meeting would determine how far it would fall. By 6 p.m. the next evening, the Maplewood Elementary School Board meeting had drawn the largest crowd in the district's history. The small conference room had been moved to the high school auditorium to accommodate the overflow. Local news crews set up cameras while parents filled every available seat, many holding copies of that morning's newspaper featuring Emma's story under the headline, "Local Hero's Daughter Honored at School." Sarah sat in the third row with Emma beside her, the Medal of Honor still around her daughter's neck. Behind them, she could hear the murmur of supportive voices, parents who had approached her throughout the day to apologize for their previous indifference and express outrage at how Emma had been treated. Victoria Walsh sat in the front row with her husband, Councilman Richard Walsh, flanked by two other school board members who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Sarah had learned that Victoria had spent the day making frantic phone calls, trying to control the narrative before tonight's meeting. The meeting began routinely with budget discussions and policy updates, but the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was waiting for the public comment period, when parents could address the board directly. Superintendent Torres stood to address the crowd. "Before we move to public comments, I want to acknowledge the wonderful presentation yesterday honoring Staff Sergeant Michael Chen. It was a moving tribute to a true American hero and his daughter Emma." The auditorium erupted in applause. Sarah squeezed Emma's hand as her daughter beamed with pride. When the applause died down, Victoria Walsh rose from her seat, her voice carrying across the auditorium with practiced authority. "While we all appreciate military service," Victoria began, "I feel compelled to address what happened yesterday. What we witnessed was not a simple school presentation, it was a carefully orchestrated media event designed to generate sympathy and publicity." The room fell silent, but Sarah could feel the mood shifting. Victoria continued, apparently oblivious to the growing hostility in the audience. "Mrs. Martinez turned her daughter's presentation into a circus, involving military personnel, media and politicians. This kind of exploitation of tragedy is exactly the type of disruptive behavior I've been concerned about. When parents use their children as pawns for attention-seeking behavior, it creates an unhealthy environment for all of our students." Victoria's voice grew stronger, feeding off what she mistook for attentive silence. "Furthermore, I question whether children from unstable family situations should be highlighted in ways that might make other students uncomfortable. We have a responsibility to maintain appropriate standards and protect all of our children from inappropriate emotional manipulation." The auditorium remained deadly quiet. Victoria, misreading the room, pressed forward with her final attack. I move that this board investigate Mrs. Martinez's fitness as a parent and consider whether Emma Chen Martinez should remain in our district. A parent who would exploit her child's tragic circumstances for personal gain clearly lacks the judgment necessary to raise a child in our community. The silence that followed was deafening. Then from the middle of the auditorium, someone began to clap slowly. Sarah turned to see Colonel Morrison, still in uniform, rising to his feet. "Ma'am," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years of military service, "I've served in 3 wars and seen the worst of human nature. But I have never in my entire career witnessed such a disgusting display of cruelty toward a Gold Star family." The colonel's words cut through the auditorium like a blade. That little girl's father died saving 247 children. He gave his life so that children just like your daughter, could go home safely to their families. And you have the audacity to suggest that honoring his sacrifice is exploitation. Victoria's face had gone white, but Morrison wasn't finished. Staff Sergeant Chen died protecting children from people who wanted to hurt them. Yesterday, I watched his daughter face down bullies with the same courage her father showed in Afghanistan. The only difference is that in Afghanistan, we knew who the enemy was. The colonel's words sparked something in the crowd. Parents began to stand, one by one, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Everyone except Victoria Walsh and her small circle of supporters. But the most powerful moment came when 8-year-old Emma Chen Martinez stood up in her seat and asked for the microphone. "Mrs. Walsh," Emma said, her voice clear and steady, "why do you hate me so much? I never did anything mean to Madison. I just wanted to tell people about my daddy, because I'm proud of him." The simplicity and innocence of the question hit the room like a physical blow. Emma continued, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "My daddy died saving kids just like Madison. He would have saved her too if she was in that school. But Madison called me a loser, and you tried to make other parents not like me. My daddy died protecting children, but you're trying to hurt one. I don't understand why." Victoria Walsh looked around the auditorium at hundreds of faces staring at her with unmistakable disgust. Parents who had once deferred to her wealth and influence now saw her clearly, a woman so consumed with maintaining her social position that she had waged war against an 8-year-old girl. The school board's response was swift and unanimous. Board member Janet Rodriguez, who had been silent throughout Victoria's attack, stood to address the room. "Mrs. Walsh, your comments tonight are not only inappropriate, they're disgraceful. This board will not tolerate attacks on military families or attempts to punish children for their parents' heroic service." Rodriguez's voice strengthened as she continued. "Furthermore, your suggestion that we investigate Mrs. Martinez's fitness as a parent is so far beyond acceptable that I question your fitness to serve on this board." The crowd erupted in applause, but Rodriguez wasn't finished. "I move that this board formally censure Victoria Walsh for her inappropriate conduct and recommend her immediate resignation from her position as board president." Seconded came voices from multiple board members. The vote was 6-1, with only Victoria's longtime ally abstaining. As the gavel fell confirming her censure, Victoria Walsh looked around the auditorium one final time. The faces staring back at her held no sympathy, no support, only the judgment of a community that had finally seen her true character. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, Sarah watched Victoria Walsh gather her things with shaking hands. The woman who had once commanded respect through fear and wealth now sat alone, abandoned even by her closest allies. Emma tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mama, is it over now? Can I just be normal at school?" Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, adjusting the Medal of Honor around Emma's neck. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over and you were never anything but perfect." As they walked toward the exit, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Madison Walsh, her face streaked with tears. "Mrs. Martinez," Madison whispered, "I'm really sorry I was mean to Emma. I didn't know about her daddy. Can you forgive me?" Sarah looked at this little girl, a child who had been taught cruelty by her mother but was brave enough to apologize on her own. "Of course, Madison, Emma would like to be your friend, if you'd like that too." The two girls looked at each other uncertainly, then Emma reached out and took Madison's hand. "Do you want to see my medal? My daddy earned it saving kids." As the two children walked ahead, comparing notes about their fathers, one a hero, one a politician, Sarah realized that the real victory wasn't Victoria Walsh's downfall. It was watching two little girls choose kindness over the hatred they had been taught. But the consequences of Victoria's actions were far from over. The fallout from the school board meeting was swift and comprehensive. Within 48 hours, Principal Henderson was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his handling of Emma's situation. The security footage that Sarah had requested weeks earlier finally surfaced, showing not only Madison's initial attack, but Henderson's dismissive response to Sarah's complaints and his failure to address the systematic bullying Emma had endured. Effective immediately, Superintendent Torres announced at a hastily called press conference, Maplewood Elementary will implement new anti-bullying policies with zero tolerance for discrimination based on family structure, economic status, or military service. All staff will undergo mandatory sensitivity training, and we're establishing a military family support program. Victoria Walsh's resignation from the school board came not through choice but through overwhelming public pressure. The newspaper's follow-up investigation revealed her months-long campaign against Emma, complete with documented emails and recorded phone calls. Her husband, Councilman Richard Walsh, announced he would not seek re-election, citing the need to focus on family healing. But the changes extended far beyond Maplewood Elementary. Emma's story had touched something deep in the community's conscience, sparking district-wide conversations about privilege, inclusion, and the true meaning of service. The local VFW Post invited Emma to speak at their Veterans Day ceremony, where she stood before 300 people and shared her father's story with the same courage she had shown in the school auditorium. "My daddy taught me that heroes aren't people who never get scared," Emma told the crowd, her Medal of Honor catching the autumn sunlight. "Heroes are people who do the right thing, even when they're scared." I was scared to tell his story, but I'm glad I did, because now everyone knows what kind of man he was. The transformation in Sarah's own life was equally remarkable. Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital's chief of staff, had attended the school board meeting and been moved by Sarah's dignity under attack. Within a month, Sarah was promoted to charge nurse of the pediatric ICU, with a salary increase that finally allowed her to breathe financially. More importantly, Emma received scholarship offers from 3 different organizations supporting military families. The local community college established an early admission program for gifted children of service members, with Emma as their first recipient. But perhaps most significantly, Emma walked taller now, her head held high with pride rather than bowed with shame. The healing between Emma and Madison Walsh proved more complex but ultimately more meaningful than anyone expected. Madison's apology had been genuine, driven by her own horror at learning the truth about Emma's father. Under the watchful and grudging supervision of Victoria Walsh, who was desperately trying to rehabilitate her family's reputation, Madison began to understand the weight of her cruelty. "I didn't know your daddy was a hero," Madison whispered to Emma during lunch one day, weeks after the school board meeting. "My mom told me you were different, but she never said why you should be proud." Emma, showing wisdom that amazed the adults around her, chose forgiveness over resentment. "My mama says holding on to being mad just hurts you. Besides, now you know the truth." Their friendship developed slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. Madison began defending Emma against other children who still made occasional comments, and Emma helped Madison with her math homework. They would never be best friends, too much had happened for that, but they became something more valuable, an example of how children could choose kindness over learned prejudice. The most lasting change came in the form of the Staff Sergeant Michael Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund, established 6 months after the school board meeting. Sarah worked with the VFW, the American Legion, and local businesses to create an endowment supporting children of fallen service members. The fund's first recipient was a high school senior whose father had died in Iraq, but Emma would always be its inspiration. Sarah also found her voice as an advocate, speaking at military family support groups and single-parent organizations across the state. She testified before the state legislature about the need for better support systems for Gold Star families and became a board member of the local military family life counseling program. "I learned that staying silent doesn't protect our children," Sarah told a gathering of military spouses at Fort Bragg. It just lets other people define who they are. Our kids deserve to know their stories, the whole truth, not just the parts that make others comfortable. 1 year later, on Memorial Day, Maplewood Elementary held its first annual Heroes Memorial Ceremony. The school had installed a granite monument in the front courtyard, engraved with the names of local service members who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen's name was prominently displayed at the top. Emma, now 9 and radiating confidence, stepped forward to place the ceremonial wreath. She wore a white dress that Sarah had bought for the occasion, the first new dress Emma had owned in 2 years, and her father's Medal of Honor hung proudly around her neck. The same parents who had once whispered about the Martinez situation now watched with genuine respect and admiration. Their children, who had learned about Michael Chen's heroism in their updated curriculum, understood they were witnessing something sacred. As Emma placed the wreath and stepped back to salute, Sarah looked around at the transformed community. Victoria Walsh stood at the back of the crowd, diminished but present, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what she had tried to destroy. Madison Walsh stood beside Emma, having volunteered to help with the ceremony, her own growth evident in her gentle support of her former victim. "My daddy died saving children he never met," Emma said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. "He believed all children deserve to be safe and loved and proud of who they are. I hope we can remember that, not just today, but every day." As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The little girl who had once come home in tears, asking why she didn't have a daddy, now stood as a symbol of courage and resilience. Victoria Walsh's cruelty had inadvertently given Emma something precious, the knowledge that her father was a hero, and that she carried his courage in her heart. Justice, Sarah realized, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about truth, redemption, and the power of a community to choose what kind of place it wanted to be. They had all chosen well,